Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 11th episode of Conceptualism. I'm pleased to have with me today Geordie Haley, who is a guitarist extraordinaire, a professor of music, a composer, and a preparer of guitars. I think that's
Yes,
yes.
that's accurate. That part for sure. Yeah, I've been preparing guitars a lot lately.
Well, and also a pedal aficionado. You seem to have a really interesting selection of gear, as I last recall.
Yes, I've been lucky. Like most of my, I, I guess a lot of stuff I've just kind of ended up with. It mostly comes from the guitars that I end up with.
Uh huh.
Because because I'm not the kind of guitar player that I've had some guitars which I regrettably have sold, but and usually never because I had to, just because I just was like, I'm going to sell that one and get another one. But um, the gear is kind of in like you had a theme about conceptualism, and that I guess is sort of like the dirty shoe part of conceptualism is like the actual bit that you use to make the sounds.
Yeah.
Um, and there was definitely a point in my life, I think, where the pedal or whatever its assigned function or multi effects processor probably was went a little too before the idea of actually what kind of music or what my statement was,
Hmm.
that I was letting the machinery run the show.
Right.
But over the years, and through happy coincidence, but also a very lucky circumstance for me, because I'm working with people who are kind of they weren't being mean or anything, but they just say, Jordy, you don't really need that crap, man. You got some great ideas. Just shut it off. Let's just see what do you sound like with all that stuff floating around? And I'm like, okay. And so I turn off the delay and the distortion and whatever kind of gadgetry, and just by taking away those props, suddenly I'm forced to dig deeper and not play so much bullshit, basically, and just actually like get some ideas that are shareable, right? And 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 fun, right?
Definitely.
I just see your smiling face. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
My daughter might be streaming, so I'm just gonna get her to get off the streamings. No streaming.
Bandwidth! We need bandwidth!
I know. Well, we've got a little, we did upgrade around here, but sometimes just because everyone's living at work, my wife has got a big job, and I'm teaching online, and then when my daughter gets home, she's online with her buds, and then suddenly, even though we've got a brand new system, it's all crammed up full of goings-ons. But yeah, so the gear is, I mean, you've gone through handfuls of gear, right?
I
In
have.
your right,
I
and
have.
eventually,
And eventually you realize that actually the stuff that you need is very limited. Like, and actually having limitations forces you to like you said, dig deeper. Like, actually the keyboard that you're seeing behind me, it actually only works on floppy disks, and which is,
right,
which is hilarious, because like people will ask me, why are you so anachronistic, why the hell do you have floppy disks? And the answer to the question is really, like, it forces me to be creative, because I only have 5 megabytes. Whereas if I'm working on the computer, I have virtually unlimited sounds, and I can just fuck around for ages and never get anything
hmm
done. Whereas if I have
that's right.
5 megabytes and I'm like, I've got to get something stored on there. I got to get something that really, is some sort of, has some sort of artistic merit and some sort of, gravitas, but I only have 5 megabytes. It forces me to really ask what's necessary.
Right. Is that a Triton? It looks like the old Triton.
This is actually a Yamaha. Oh boy, what is it called? DGX something.
Oh, one of those guys. Okay, that's kind of my era of keyboards.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah,
So,
it's a floppy disk. That was a big deal, man, when that came out. Let me tell you, I've got I've got every kind of medium, right? It's like everything. I've got every storage device for those. I've got several acres of floppy disks full of samples somewhere in my pile of stuff.
That's hilarious.
It
Yeah.
is, yeah, and some of them are really good. I have to, but the thing about and there's a conceptualism thing for you, so you conceive of your sounds. You get a big bunch of stuff going on with that piece of machinery, and then it's gone. For whatever reason, it breaks, or you sell it, or you take it back. You rented it or whatever, but and then you've got the medium, the storage device,
Yeah.
you know, and then you think, oh well, I'll get back to, I'm gonna go find that thing again someday. Of course, you never do. So I've got these amazing sounds, and I'm never gonna do anything with it because the device that I need is it's at your place, in Toronto, right? Whatever, right? I just can't get there to use it. But yeah,
But
what?
oh, go
So you
ahead.
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say, when you talk about, getting rid of all the effects pedals and just kind of really focusing on the sound, a guitarist that sort of comes to mind is Miles Okasaki. Like I had a chance to
Oh yeah.
I had a chance to jam with him in Lunenburg when he came there,
Oh, that's
and
right.
and and as I remember, he had an amp which he never pushed beyond the two mark. Like
Oh,
the volume was always one or two, and it was just a hollow body guitar, or not a semi hollow body guitar, and the amp, and there was no effects, no distortion, nothing, no, not even reverb. The guy
all
was
the
just
fingers. No, he doesn't. He doesn't like reverb. Although his album before, um,
Trickster,
or two albums before Trickster, if you listen to it, it's just full of effects,
right?
wah pedals and delays all over the place and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a great album. Totally different than Trickster, right? Trickster's really influenced by Steve Coleman's work, right? Which in turn is really influenced by Henry Threadgill. Did you hear that about Threadgill? And
It sort of went a bit fuzzy. If you could just repeat the two names.
sure, two big New York, and these guys are both on Pi Recordings, which is where Trickster is. That's the label Trickster's on.
Uh-huh.
Is Steve Coleman and Henry Threadgill. So,
Gotcha.
have you heard Henry Threadgill's music very much?
I haven't. But I don't know either of those names. So I have a feeling I'm
Okay.
gonna be delving into their music
Yeah,
after
and
our
all of their latest is on Pi Recording, so it's pretty accessible.
yeah.
Steve Coleman goes back quite a ways. Well, probably, God, I first heard of him 30 years ago.
Okay.
And Henry Threadgill's, it was a part of the AACM, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Music.
Okay.
So he came out of Chicago with Braxton, Anthony Braxton, and Roscoe Mitchell, and Joseph German, Lester Bowie from the Art Ensemble. Just a huge, and George Lewis. So huge intellectual, super creative, total maverick jazz guys, right? Like really, for me, just completely. If jazz went anywhere, it went with them. They took it,
So
right?
they were at the
It's,
vanguard. They were at the edge.
still are, like Steve Coleman is still like, I mean, he's a force to contend with. And Okazaki was one of, I think, the probably the only guitar player that's ever played in Steve Coleman's band, right? So he's had a couple of Canadian guys in his bands. David Varellis, who's a Cuban guy, but he came to Canada,
Uh-huh.
and this other guy will come to mind. I've seen him a few times. So he's had a few like Canadian piano players in Steve have played with Steve Coleman.
Right.
These guys are real system guys. Like there's I went to see, like, Henry Threadgill is one of my big heroes, right? I mean
Mm-hmm.
Braxton too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but speaking of like absolute successful conceptualism on a page, when I went to see Threadgill, there's a guitar player in his band. He, Henry Threadgill has often had guitar players in his band, and this guy's Liberty Ellman, And Liberty's like Miles. He plays like just like an acoustic guitar in this band with like drums and bass and tubas, lots of tubas and lots of low brass, and Henry plays alto and flute. Um, but we went to see them in New York in 2007, and it was at the Jazz Gallery, and it was I was so excited because it's Threadgill doesn't like he never hardly ever came to Toronto. He might go, but usually if he toured in Europe, right? Um, but Henry Threadgill's band was astounding, and they were so nice. So I went up and I said, introduced myself to Henry Threadgill, and gave him one of my CDs and said he'd been a huge influence. But he was very sweet, but there was a huge lineup to talk to him. But the guitar player, Liberty Elman, talked to me and took me right up on the stage and said, "Well, here's the charts." He said, "Let me tell you, we rehearse way more than we play, you know." And so this is a band that rehearsed like twice a week. Heavy players, heavy music, but everything was like a squiggle and a really dense rhythmic plot.
Right.
And the squiggle was referring to a mode or a chord or a stack of notes.
Uh-huh.
And your duty was to play some of this material melodically in this rhythmic plot
Context. Right.
from the rhythms, like very strictly, like you had to follow those rhythms that were written out
Uh-huh.
before you could go and do your own thing. You had to make a statement from his from Henry's material. So I thought, whoa, that's tough. That can't be easy, you know, especially with the gang of players he had with him.
Yeah.
At that point, the drummer was Daphnis Prieto, who is a renowned drummer. He's played with Roberto Acapinti. I don't know if you know the
Yes.
Acapintis.
Yes. Yes.
You'll be running into them in Toronto if you met them.
Well, I'm friends with them on
Um,
Facebook actually, and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
one
yeah.
of my like I play with a lot of like I actually just went into the studio like a few days ago and recorded
Nice,
with a couple of students from Humber,
nice,
and it was really fun, and they've
awesome.
worked with Robert.
Yeah, Roberto's, yeah, he's amazing. And Michael is his brother. Roberto and Michael are brothers, and then the cousin David, he's a great guitarist as well, and he teaches at U of T.
Uh-huh.
So, and then the other big systems guy is well Steve Coleman, but the other big systems guy who looms so large is Anthony Braxton. With he's been using um, geometric shapes and algebraic shapes and all kinds of stuff like that to guide his to guide his thing. There's my mom. Sorry. Hello. Hi, mom. I'll call you right back. Okay. Um. So yeah, Braxton's just done a million. His compositions are. Have you followed any of his stuff at all, Anthony
I
Braxton?
I haven't. I
Hmm.
haven't. Again,
No?
this is probably stuff I need to look up. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's not a lot of people know. It's a big thing. But yeah, I mean, I think if you were hanging around in the States and you went to the New England Conservatory, then there'd be more education about what those guys were up to. But in like the sort of Humber circles, not to put them down, and obviously they know about this stuff. It's not really taught that much of the just the history of improvised music in Chicago. It's
Hmm.
kind of like stuff in a way. I look at it in a way that it kind of, and this isn't really true, but it's a little bit of a metaphor for me. It was like the ashes of the waste that Coltrane and Albert Eiler did to, playing on changes and all that stuff, and they just went more modal and free, and the later Coltrane stuff like Sunship and all of those kinds of things. Um, it's kind of like Threadgill and Braxton and Roscoe Mitchell and Lester Bowie, and these guys kind of came in and went, well, okay, well, we got all this free stuff. Let's try to put the pieces back together, but we're going to put it back together so it doesn't resemble some sort of, again, there's nothing wrong with any of this stuff, but so much of jazz is, up to a certain point is based on Broadway
Right.
songs,
Right.
like the 251s and all that kind of stuff. There's nothing.
The
I love
standards.
it.
The standards.
I
But
work
see,
on that all the time, right?
So
But this later stuff is more coming out of what Monk was doing, right?
right, right, and I think that's really interesting that you bring that up because like okay, so the kind of stuff that Monk did, I'm very inspired by him, and I'm very inspired by the
Mm,
kinds of stuff that he did. And a lot of people don't actually realize that the dissonances and the spaces and the odd phrases that he actually used to practice that stuff. Like he used to work really hard
yeah,
to actually sound the
yeah,
way that he sounded. It was completely
yeah.
intentional. And a lot of
Oh
people
yeah.
don't understand that because like I was reading this review that some music critic wrote, and he said that Monk was the elephant in the room of keyboard players. And I thought, you know what? I thought, you know what? No one knows who the fuck you are, but everyone knows who Monk is. So that really tells
Sure.
me, you know,
That's that's a critic. That's a criticism leveled at critics quite a bit. But the proof is in the pudding when John Coltrane and Miles Davis and Sonny Rollins and just about all of those heavyweights from that era showed up at Monk's doorstep for lessons and sessions, and they all worked with Monk to
that's right.
on Monk's music, right? They didn't go over there and blow through standards. They worked on Monk's tunes, and I
which
and I
which
think
now which
that's
now ironically are standards.
yeah, yeah. They well because they're 32 bar forms for the most part, so he did write in that fashion. But so for me, Threadgill and Braxton are guys who have their own conception of how to improvise and are really their compositions are full of directions for improvising, and there's notes too, like there's written material, but the improvising is really guided.
Mhm.
It's kind of laid out and sometimes in a way, but it's also totally free, right? I don't know. They're both pretty fascinating composers for me. Very, I mean, I don't really understand their stuff. I need to study it more, but it's um, for me the stuff that they do. It sounds different, but always um, it's always going back to that rhythmic element that defines jazz, the black community. But and as a white guy, I'll say North American community, right? But it's like that whole concept of rhythm
Right.
in the culture because it's everywhere in the music that comes out of North America, black or white or whatever. There's no there's no getting around the drum set, I guess, basically, right?
Right.
Like it's a big part of it, right?
and
So
and, and
it's
that's the other thing that like a lot of okay, so rhythm is actually, I would say, the most fundamental building block of music. uh you
oh,
know
for sure, yeah,
and so in that sense, even things that are not really overtly rhythmic, like if you listen to something by Messiaen,
right,
some of his organ symphonies, but when you
mm,
really like when you really think about it, it's actually incredibly rhythmic. It's just
oh,
that
yeah,
rhythm is obscured by these giant massive chords and these really obscure melodies. But when you really think about it, there's actually polyrhythms in Messiaen's music. And people, when I
yeah.
bring that when I bring up that idea, or that actually that music is rhythmic, people will look at me like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And I'm just like, listen to it from the perspective of, how is it spaced, where are the chords. If you just look at it in terms of a rhythm chart, you can actually see that there's a lot of polyrhythms going on, and juxtapositions, and it's not easy to hear if you're not looking for it,
It's totally true.
you know
I mean, Messiaen's always fascinated me. Absolutely, I love. He might be one of my favorites of the serialists. And that serialism is definitely has influenced Braxton. There's no question. Threadgill, I'm not so sure, but um, there's a super ultra serialism where every single part of music is codified, right? Like so, there's um, so all of the like just playing games not only with the pitches but with like setting up the rhythms so that they're repeating in a certain cycle and the harmonies repeating in a certain cycle and then the tom well I think Messiaen's greatest one of his greatest things was having the timbres change so slight ever like it's always moving.
Yeah.
The sound of it, not just but the colors are always moving, right? So
Yes.
that's part of. Apparently, he was one of these guys who could see um,
Right.
that music would
Synesthesia.
trigger colors in his brain. Right?
Right.
So then he can hear it. So,
Well, and synesthesia is really interesting because like it I mean the brain as we know is wired for interconnection. It's just that some people have it more overtly or more
mhm,
obviously than other people. you know
mhm,
um like like some people when they say a word they actually taste something. So
mhm,
and there's all these connections in the brain. So like for me, when I hear a note or like a series of notes, it actually that has a shape for me. So it's almost like
yeah,
geometry. So I don't know if you ever heard of cymatics, the visual representation of sound. um
right.
so for me,
That's
every note is
great.
kind of like a cymatic wave. Like I actually
Yeah,
I'm seeing these things, and that's how I remember. I don't actually remember the pitches, I remember the shapes.
that's amazing. That's great.
you know so
Yeah,
it's really
how I
interesting.
wish. Yeah. No, there's a lot of and these again, all of these things kind of get back to a conception of or conceptualism, but because that's how we conceive of the music.
Yes.
But yeah, so but for me, I guess we started pedals and the sounds and the colors. Um, Definitely as an improviser, I would say that the pedals of you know once I turned it around, I stopped using them so much. To be quite honestly, I just shut it off. And then as I go back to them over the years, then I'm in control of. I know what they do, right? So
Right.
we've gone from what does this do to like I know what it does, and I know that this moment, if I step on that pedal or I bring this effect in with my fingers or a little chime or whatever, then I know that what's going to happen.
Right.
It doesn't take away the mystery though in any way, right? It's like, in fact,
It
it makes it
deepens it.
better.
Yeah, it deepens it.
Yeah, right,
It's like
right, because
it's it reminds me of this mathematician Ramanujan, who um,
no idea.
okay, Ramanujan, he basically, okay, so he grew up in India. He was extremely poor. He had a very rudimentary understanding of mathematics, but from that rudimentary understanding he was able to just through intuition come up with these incredible formulas which
Mhm.
basically changed the world. We're still, I mean, people are still discovering Ramanujan formulas and finding the ways that they work, applying to everything from quantum physics to black holes to statistics to to stock trading. I mean, it's ridiculous. This guy, I mean, just from his intuition could come up with these brilliant forms, and he didn't know how he came up with them. It was like it just happened, and so then when a
Wow.
professor from Cambridge discovered this his work, because he sent it to a whole bunch of professors, nobody understood what he was doing. Everyone thought he was like out of his mind or something. But then this professor from Cambridge looked at it and he said, you know what, this is so original and so brilliant that nobody would have the imagination to
Mm.
come up with it if it wasn't true. And so he
Right.
invited him to Cambridge, and he said, "Look, you know what? You need to prove these things. You need to write the proofs." So Ramanujan then is forced to take all these classes, and so in one of the classes, a professor puts a problem on the board and says this is an unsolvable problem, or it's basically impossible to solve. And Ramanujan puts up his hand and says, "No, I know, I've already solved the problem." Goes onto the board, solves the problem, and then afterwards, the professor gets really mad, beats him up, and says, "If you do that again, I'm going to throw you out of Cambridge." And so that to me is kind of interesting because by in a way, like by actually studying Ramanujan, you're actually better understanding that intuition and those beautiful forms. But actually, for Ramanujan, it was very difficult to look at his own work like that because to him, it was just so obvious. It was like, I just
Mm.
get it, and
Right.
everybody else was like struggling. So I think when you're that far ahead, or that when you've discovered something, like, or you have this concept, you have this conceptualism built into your brain where you actually understand the concept so much that it's like literally like breathing, and then you have to suddenly explain to people how you're breathing. I mean, it's very difficult, you know
It is. It's a toughie, but I mean, I think that is when again, like looking to this master mathematician, but when I look to Braxton and Threadgill, Um, and a lot of the characters that came up in Chicago with this AACM, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Music. I look at those guys, and they really did come up with formulas in music to allow everyone the freedom of expression, um, and but at the same time, demand a pretty high level of interpretation.
Hmm.
So that was, a lot of it's off the page. It's not on the page, but you're looking at these little symbols, much like mathematics,
Yes.
and the symbol itself is telling you, which is
Right.
kind of where society's going when on our cell phone we've got like a gazillion symbols, as as most of it. As for me, I'm kind of like, I don't even, what the heck, but I poke at them and I go, oh, that's what that does, and then hopefully I'll remember. But somebody engineered that, right? Like somebody came up with some way of saying, oh, that is what
Right.
we're going to have this tool represented. And so to conceive of that is really, it's a big step. But again, I equate a lot of the things that happened in music as being predecessors or forebears, or um, you know you could all like predicting, or
Right.
all that kind of stuff
Right. Because we
of
don't
the
we don't really
computational.
we don't live in an ahistoric vacuum. I mean, we have to contend
No,
with all the stuff that has come before.
right. And so, but a lot of that stuff is the computational stuff, like the player piano or the barrel organ or all that kind of stuff. This computational stuff has kind of put us where we are today. We're on the precipice of, well, all kinds of bad stuff, but there's some really amazing stuff happening in the world of programming, and having you know computational forces unlike we've never seen in our lives, right? And it's just getting bigger and bigger, and some
But
of it's for the good.
But you know what's interesting is when you think about if you look at history and you look at the history of computation, right? I mean, I mean, think about this. Like when they were building the pyramids, right? I mean,
Mm,
you'd have to imagine the amount of computation and the amount of understanding that took, to be able to do
mm.
something like that and to build something that would last through the ages. I mean, what architecture do we have today that's going to last 1,000 years? And we have access.
Not much.
We have access to computers. We have access to modeling
Mm,
software.
mm.
In the amount of power of computation that we have is staggering. And I mean the breadth
It
of,
is.
of, of, of human knowledge is expanding so quickly, that it's
Mm.
it's it's almost impossible to keep up with. I mean, we live in
Yeah,
the knowledge we live in a knowledge economy where how
mm.
much you know and
That's what
what you know.
that's what's become.
Yeah. And so so to me it's really interesting that people are have access to all this wealth of resources, and they spend their time watching cat videos and dog videos on Instagram. it's
Right.
it's like
When they're not involved in that stuff. Yeah, how people relax. Um but I guess I don't know. Anyway, for me, the things that Braxton was coming up with, pen and paper and Threadgill, they come from the same school, like sort of the same neighborhoods, which is really amazing to me. But they've diverged, in many different ways. But I urge you to check out Anthony Braxton and Henry Threadgill. I think you'll really enjoy that music, and what those guys have come up with, because it's really very inspiring for me and all of my peers and stuff like that.
I will.
Braxton spent a lot of time in Toronto. He's been there. He collaborated with the the Association for Improvised Music in Toronto, that was run by Ken Aldcroft, the late Ken Aldcroft, great guitarist who passed away, and Scott Thompson, a trombone player, Rob Cletton, if you've met Rob, and Nick Fraser. I'm sure you may have heard of,
Yes,
drummer,
I'm in
great
fact
drummer.
I think I'm friends with Nick.
Yeah, yeah. So Nick is a guy that, with those other gents, started the Association of Improvised Music in Toronto, and they did a great thing with Jean Martin of Barnyard Drama. This is years ago, where Braxton came up and formed an orchestra of local players. So, and it was quite astounding. But that's one of the things that Braxton does is he reaches into communities and forms improvised orchestras around his compositions. He did it in Vancouver, Montreal, but he does it all over the world, right? So
That's amazing.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's
Well, I'm sure at some point you'll be involved in something like that because there's, um, once this virus is finally under control, I think there's going to be a younger generation like yourself emerging, and folks like Nick. I think there's going to be large ensembles again,
yes.
and a chance to work in a large ensemble, to have a creative orchestra, right?
Indeed, indeed.
Right, because
Well,
those
and
are that's a
actually,
ton of fun.
I've been pretty lucky to get involved in some of these, improvised ensembles. There's a initiative led by this guy called Michael Palumbo. It's called Exit Points, and
Okay, don't know it.
it's called as it's basically like a Zoom improvising orchestra where
Ah,
you have people come in and they form these ensembles, and and people play together, and it's just incredible. Like, I mean, of course,
wow.
Zoom audio really is not the best way to do things, but really, like, I think it's very interesting because the latency and the delay and all this kind of stuff, it's actually incorporated into the playing and into the style of the playing,
Okay,
and used as a
interesting.
compositional tool, which I think is really
Wow.
interesting.
Yeah,
And some of my other
yeah.
colleagues, like there's this guy called Tristan Zaba who just recently graduated from UFT, studied with Christos Hastis, and he wrote
Okay.
I think it was a string quartet or something like that for Zoom, and so he was actually incorporating the delay and the latency as part of the composition. And I think it was
Wow.
sponsored. I think it was sponsored by SOCAN and maybe the the Royal Conservatory. I'm not sure, but it was really
Sure. Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
It was really interesting because to me that showed that these institutions that were supporting music before, in a live context, were also willing to support music, in this new age or this new
Yeah.
context where suddenly we can't play
Mhm.
live, but we do have the internet, and we do have things like Zoom, and there's another platform called Jam Kazam, I think, which
Right.
some people have been using.
Yeah, I've heard that's not even as good as Zoom in some ways. So they were devised it. I'm sure eventually what'll happen is someone will be able to figure out the latency part of it all.
Yes.
Or what I'm really pushing for, just as a kind of a lark, but the great Frank Zappa before he died was investing in um, both the projection and internet transference of and the reception of three-dimensional images, right? So instead of having this conversation in a two-dimensional screen like we are right now,
Right. It
we'd
would be
actually
like a
be
hologram.
three-dimensionally facing each other somewhere in a three-dimensional cafe going, yeah, and then we could jam. So yeah, I've got my three-dimensional guitar here, and you know what I mean? Like that's quite a few steps from where we are right now. But
But yeah, no, that's
um,
totally possible. And actually, there's
but
a choral composer called Eric Whitaker. I don't know if you've heard that name. Um,
that guy, that name I've heard. Yeah,
Eric Whitaker, he did an orchestra performance. I think it was a TED talk where he had a live orchestra of like 100 people and a choir, and then he also like had thousands of people joining from all over the internet, and they
right.
did a composition together. And I thought that was brilliant. Like, I thought
Yeah, yeah.
that was really interesting.
Yeah, no, it's time. There's definitely a lot of hard work and engineering going into all of this stuff that's happening online. And you guys are in a pretty tight lockdown in Toronto right now, eh?
We are, yes, yeah,
Yeah, and that just happened here. I mean, it's not crazy, but it's still in Halifax. We had it pretty good, like we had a whole bunch of gigs, and there's a little bit of a return of the way things used to be and all that stuff.
yeah,
But just in the past week, the cases have gone right through the roof, and they shut us all down again.
yes.
So it's
It's difficult.
well, it's tough, but I mean it's been even tougher for yourself and my my associates in Toronto because I mean that city without music is a grim place. Holy crap! Like it's at least we have the ocean out here, right? Toronto,
which is nature's most interesting well, aleatoric and and soothing sort of music
yeah,
creation, you know.
that's exactly where I was when I remembered we were supposed to have this conversation. I was like, ah. But the yeah, no, like for me, because I mean I love Toronto. I didn't like the physical part of it. I didn't really care that much about. Stinking hot in the summer, and kind of not much of a winter place really if you're living right downtown. So of course, like any city, it's the people, and as a musician, the music in
Yes,
Toronto is it's it's great out here. It's great in Vancouver. It's great in Montreal, but there's just more of it in Toronto. I
definitely.
was still like, and you can probably spend your whole life just discovering different little scenes in that city. Like
Totally.
people you don't hear about, they're not out there on whatever tip, or you're just not aware of the tip they're on. You know what I mean? Like this
Definitely.
is another thing like happens. Like this guy you just mentioned, Eric Whitaker, I think, right?
Yes.
So that's a name I've read probably half a dozen times. Not really anything what he does or who he's associates with or anything like that. But
Right.
in Toronto, you get a chance to actually go hear that stuff. Right? When I first moved to Toronto, I was so hungry. My ears were so hungry. I just went to hear everything. I
Right.
probably spent within the first 4 months I lived there. I probably spent about $1,000 on tickets. Because I was just going out there. I didn't know anyone.
Right.
We were. I was playing a little bit, but the thing for me coming from Little Fredericton, New Brunswick, was like, man, I gotta go hear this chamber music. I gotta go hear this amazing Vietnamese concert. I'm
Yeah.
gonna go hear these tabla guys. Like just on and on and on and on, like every night of the week,
Well,
until
that's
finally, you know,
that kind of musical education is so important. And it's kind of
it
funny
is.
because when I first moved to Canada, I came to Nova Scotia, and so and suddenly, Nova Scotia is kind of weird because it's
It
this
is.
it's this little point in the middle of nowhere, but there's such a richness and diversity to the music scene. I mean, like Martha Argerich came to Lunenburg. I mean,
Mm,
like
yeah, right.
like Miles Okasaki, Dan Weiss, like Dinuk Wijaratna. I mean, if I was not in Nova Scotia, I wouldn't have had a chance to hang out with or jam with any of these cats. And
Yeah,
so I am so happy that I started, the first places I came to was Nova Scotia. And it was also a good way to get my career started because
that's right.
because I feel like if I'd arrived in Toronto and I tried to establish myself in Toronto, it would have been a lot harder,
Yeah,
because I wouldn't have had as many concerts, as many gigs, and certainly not at the same level as in Nova Scotia. Because, you
right.
know, like in Toronto, I would have been swallowed up by the music scene. Whereas in Halifax, it was or in Nova Scotia, it was what I was doing was different enough that people paid attention to it.
Yeah, you were welcomed, right? And then
Exactly,
and
exactly.
then that
That's the
gives you
point. I was
it gives
welcome.
you
Yeah.
it gives you credence and credits when you come to Toronto. That when you go to Toronto, it's like, oh, well, you have played with this or that, and you can drop some names, and but
Yes.
more importantly, you've got the experience of making music with different levels of players, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
that's what happens in Toronto. Right? It happens pretty quick. So it's yeah, no, I do miss the music scene there quite a bit. I
But
don't.
then I
I
mean I mean it's also true that depending on where you are in the world, for example, when I was in India, when I was studying in India, I mean
mm,
that was an incredible experience because
yeah.
I got to play with some really heavy people, and then also I was part of a bunch of student orchestras, and that's actually how I met some of these heavy cats, is because I was invited to go to these student festivals or these student concerts, and I was on stage and I was playing, and I was like, oh, I was slightly bored, but then after the concert, these people that I looked up to incredibly, they would come to me and say, do you want to jam? And I would be like, you want to jam with me? Okay, let's do it. And so
That's
so
it. Right.
that actually gave me the confidence to realize, what, I can actually jam with literally anyone. I just have
Hmm.
to have the courage to say yes, you know
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
sometimes you're intimidated, sometimes you're like, I'm playing with somebody who's you know 3 times or 2 times my age and has this wealth of musical chops, and how am I even gonna how can I even be in the same room as this person? But then when you start playing with them, you realize, you know what? We're all just human and we all just want to play,
That's right.
you know?
That's right. Yeah. It's
And
the energy, right?
it's the
It's
energy. That's right. Yeah.
right because
And
like.
and holding space, creating a safe space, like that's the other
Hmm.
thing. Like I learned that in order to have the, that kind of freedom to take risks, you need a safe space. And so you need people who will give you that safety to like
Hmm.
to feel comfortable
Hmm.
to actually,
Hmm.
take these musical leaps.
It's absolutely true. It really is. And sometimes with your peers, you don't get that. So sometimes it's you're playing with younger, less experienced people, but they're so keen that they look to you as as a leader, and then sometimes you're a side person or a participant in a musical process where you're not the leader, and you but you really are inspired to bring something,
Yeah.
and the safer the space, the more successful any of that could be, right?
And it's interesting that you make that distinction between being the leader or being in charge or being, the person that everyone's looking to, and being in more of a situation where it's
Mm,
more democratic, or it's more, it's more level, where, like everybody's an equal participant. and
mm,
and for me anyway, I mean, I find the hierarchy of, for example, an institution like the orchestra not very interesting, because, okay, so it's the conductor is god, and then the conductor tells
mm,
the I'm sorry, the composer tells the conductor, this is what you need to do, and then the conductor is the, the face of the orchestra, and then the conductor tells the section principals, and the section principals tell their sections. And by the end of it, you realize that the information stream is moving one way, but like, let's say you're the third violin and you want to tell the composer something. I mean, it's basically impossible,
right. Yeah.
in that
Yeah.
hierarchy. And so
Yeah.
I'm more interested in orchestras where it's more democratic, where it's like everybody's co-creating. I'm not saying there's no that in these situations there's no need for leadership, because leadership is important and it's a necessary part. Somebody has to have a vision.
Well, it's
But
also it's also hurting cats, right? I mean, this is what our man Danuk, he's just excels at that. Like, Danuk is watching Danuk conduct an orchestra is a total lesson in humility and grace, right? Like, he just he's just he knows what he's got. He's got a great bunch of players there, right? Like, they can play anything. I've just seen him work with the Nova Scotia Symphony, but like he's worked with all kinds of different orchestras.
yes,
And he is, I think, one of these guys that's kind of going towards the democracy
right.
part of it. You
He
know,
is. No, he is. And I
it's
mean,
but it's hard to do on a on a
but
modern composition, yeah. But on a Beethoven, it's kind of like all this set stuff, right? It's hard to reinterpret Beethoven like the actors reinterpret Shakespeare, right?
right.
It's
But here's the thing, like even the Nook has a very specific idea of what he wants. Like he
mm,
like he knows what he wants. And
mm-hmm,
like in that sense, like and he also knows how to get it, but without ever like making somebody feel like, oh, it's only my vision that's important. He makes you
never.
feel included even though he knows specifically what he's going for. And I
Sure.
think that's an art form. That's an
It
art form.
is,
Like
man. Like, I've
in
seen him do it.
diplomacy,
It's
yeah, in
amazing.
diplomacy and people skills, because really, like, that's what's important. Like, if you end up jamming with somebody or working with somebody, and you end up with a bad taste in your mouth, and you're like, I don't want to ever work with this person again, then that's not a productive situation. That's not a
Nope.
healthy situation either. So
No.
to actually
It happens.
respect the people, like I said, to create a safe space, but like to also be well versed in these people skills and these diplomatic things, where even if someone is doing something that, oh, you don't like what they're doing, there's a certain way that you tell them, without making them feel like less than,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, and Danuk's he's a master at that. I saw, yeah, I saw him do it. It was great to see because you could tell the orchestra just loved him. You know, they, whoever had to do their homework knew they had to do their homework, but it wasn't like their name was on a wall somewhere. So
Yeah,
it's
you're
really
on the you're on the naughty list. You got to take a time out,
right.
sit on the naughty chair.
Absolutely. So what's next for you as far as uh, a project? What have you been working on? I'm sure you got lots of stuff going on, but what about like just like for you? What's a project coming up?
So I'm actually working right now on having an instrument built for myself. um, like a keyboard
Nice.
instrument. So I don't know if you ever heard the name
Hmm.
Cameron Carpenter, the organist. Um,
Sounds
Probably.
so familiar. Yeah, yeah.
So I'll send you a link to one of his work. He's a genius, virtuoso, and he actually had an instrument built for himself called the International Touring Organ, which is basically a five keyboard with pedal, digital pipe organ,
Hmm.
with like audiophile quality
Right.
samples. So now partially inspired by his instrument, I want to create an instrument for myself. But I, of course, am choosing an even more pretentious name, which is the Infinite Sonic Possibility Interface, because I want this instrument to be like a library, an archive of all the world's musical traditions. So on this keyboard instrument, which I envision as a 360-degree instrument with five keyboards and a pedal board, and like 400 keys. Per manual, I'm gonna have all these sounds, which of course includes the Western orchestra and the pipe organ, but also things like tabla, hammered dulcimer, didgeridoo, all these things that you would never find on any other pipe organ. So as an organist, because I see the organ as being my main instrument, I want to have the ability to basically be maybe 10 or 20 orchestras worth of sounds all on my own, you know.
Mm,
And
that sounds great.
so I'm having this instrument built for myself, and that's the main project that's been taking a lot of my time, in terms of designing it, in terms of finding the sounds, in terms of figuring out who I want to commission to record sounds to be featured on this instrument, things like that.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's a gigantic step.
It
But
is.
um,
It is. It, and
you
I,
know, as
I
far
kind of,
as
I kind of see it. Sorry to interrupt. I mean,
that's
I kind of see that as like my magnum opus, as like the legacy that I'll leave as a musician. But I don't see, that's the other thing. Like, I don't just see myself as a composer or as a musician. I see myself as, and I think Cameron does as well, as a machine operator. As like in the same way as like as like somebody that's operating a crane. Because to me, it's like it's not just what I'm playing and what the sounds, although that in itself is so fascinating. It's actually that mechanism, that machine that's being used to actually realize what's in my mind, because there's no
right,
instrument that currently exists that allows me to do what I am envisioning in my head, to give me that kind of
right,
instant gratification of being what I like to call a spontaneous composer. Because I see
right.
myself as a composer, but I don't like the idea of writing things down, or even graphic scores I find limiting, because I want that instant gratification. I want that instant feedback
Mm,
of what I put out being there the moment I think about it. That
right. Yeah.
instantaneous, that kind of instantaneous feedback, and you can't get that if you take the conventional role of writing things down or being a composer in the traditional sense of the word.
Well, yeah. Well, you're going to get something else, right? So
Yes, it's
the,
a different process. It's a
it's the
different it's a different mechanism.
right,
And
right.
that's why to me the mechanism is just as important as what's made on it.
Yeah, no, that's great, and the ultimate conceptual musical tool, man. It'd be great. I mean, I think as harmony players, we are definitely. Speaking of gizmos and pedals and stuff, I've got several systems around here that are guitar synthesizers, right?
Yes.
And
Alan
and
Holdsworth Alan Holdsworth used to use a lot of guitar synthesizers.
yeah, he did. He had some different things that he used, and this amazing young lady on Facebook the other day on the Holdsworth. There's a Holdsworth tribute page,
Uh-huh. Of
and
course
this
there
and
is.
this young, yeah. Oh no, and actually it's as those pages go, it's really great. This young woman was she's got one of those headless, one of those things. There's no headstock on the guitar; it's all down on the bridge,
Right.
the tuning.
Yeah.
But she had like a couple of different gizmos attached to her guitar, and you could tell she was triggering some synths that are like super tapper, like all kinds of really interesting chops, like tapping away, like that kind of a thing.
Was it a what's it called? The Chapman stick, or was it like an actual like
No, no, I mean, it's the same kind of technique. The problem with the Chapman stick is that um, it's really hard. You can't really strum it like a guitar,
right.
right? So there's you can hit all the notes. It's more like a piano, the Chapman stick. Have you ever tried one?
I have actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. So it's a
It
touch
is it is
instrument.
it is. You're right. Like in the same way as the harpeggi, for example.
Right. okay, the arpeggio, which is something I'm dying to try. I mean, that is one of the downfalls of Halifax is new instruments do pop up, and you'll never see them out here for years, right? So unless you when you come to visit, maybe you'll bring one. But um, but there's no the guitar synthesizer allows me to go into that realm of calling up sounds,
Yes.
and I have spent time again back in the floppy disk days. The Korg put out a great keyboard called the Triton or Tritone,
Yes.
and it had a sampler on board that I made great use of, and at that point I had a little guitar synth rig, and I could trigger my own samples, which was I got to get back to that. Actually, that's a really good thing, dude. You've just the first time in years I've thought of that. That's great. Maybe that's a little thing I need to do. But I could trigger my own samples. So I've got a vast collection of sounds. I used to go around, and we all do this, right? With a little recorder, like in my time it was the Sony Walkman Pro cassette recorder, which is an amazing device. If you ever see one, you could buy them super cheap. And then the next thing up from that was portable recording, sort of ambient sounds, atmospheric sounds,
Yeah.
outside sounds.
Yeah.
Was the mini disc recorder. I don't know if you've
Right.
ever seen one of those, right? And in between that was the DAT machine. Anyway, so I've got all these sounds on mediums, and I was triggering them with my guitar, which was really quite a hoot. I'd be like, playing a sort of normal kind of guitar stuff, la la la, and then the next thing you know, concrete blocks falling off a chair with twittery birds. Oh, okay. So, you know, it's kind of like a little bit of where you're going with your with
It's like
with your
you
your machine.
basically become like a sonic wizard. You're like you're
Right.
conjuring
As
you're
long as you
conjuring
know where it is.
right.
My biggest
Which is
my
another
biggest problem
problem.
is,
Which is
where's the catalog? Like what? Do you know Sun Ra's work at all?
yeah, I
Have you?
do. I do.
Yeah. Okay, good. I thought you might. Yeah. So, because he was really going towards some of that in a way, because he
Yes.
really experienced a lot with synthesizers, right? Like
Yes.
as much as Chick Corea or Herbie Hancock or Joe Zawinul, who I think is kind of the master of all that stuff, like the analog synth kind of things.
Right.
But
And
of
it's
course,
interesting.
Sunrise taken a whole different place.
It's interesting too because like when you're dealing with an analog synth, I mean there's no real way to save the I mean unless you sort of notated all the settings. I mean there's kind of that chance based thing where you twiddle a knob and suddenly the sound is eons away from like where you were before, and
Right.
even the smallest turn of a dial will change the sound in such a way, it'll color it in like a whole different way. So there's that element of temperamentality, which like working inside of a computer, you have to actually create systems to then be temperamental, which is something that I think Brian Eno does very well. He's a master of doing that, you know
Yeah.
like and like I was watching a video of him manipulating Pro Tools, and quote unquote humanizing the drummer, and it was hilarious because like you start out with this straight beat that's like as boring as could possibly be, and then suddenly he puts in all these like parameters which completely make it sound like totally out there and so funky. And it's like it's because he added all these chance based variable operations into Pro Tools, you know
Right. That's the again, like it's getting back to systems and codification, and how do you compute those chance-based permutations? Like it's so fascinating to me. I have such little ambition to be able to do that myself, but I'm I'm definitely a I'm definitely a winner because there are artists out there doing that kind of stuff that I get to use down the road, right? So
right,
it's
right,
it's it's an interesting and fascinating the number of tools we have to help us conceive of our musical ideas.
definitely.
But um, again, I think and I'm not, in no way am I a purist in any. I'm not a purist at all, but because some people are, they're really like that's the how it's going to be. Um, Although I've seen people change that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But definitely, going back to our acoustic instruments like the acoustic guitar, you playing acoustic piano or what have you. I could still do a lot of the same stuff. You know what I mean? Like I could still tap and make strange sounds and beautiful harmonies and play fast and all those kinds of things. So I don't feel like it's a prop anymore. It was certainly in starting out and going, oh, this chorus is amazing, and if I turn the knobs all the way up, it sounds like marching aliens or whatever. But you know, but once you turn the stuff off, you realize that maybe fiddling around with that machinery has taught you something about how you make music, right?
Yes.
And so that you can carry that forward.
Well, I think
Have you
that's
met?
beautiful. I think that's beautiful. Actually, I think that the way that you articulated that is so profound. That actually, all these incredible leaps and advances that we make, suddenly allow us to rediscover actually the simplicity and the inherent beauty in these. Because when the piano was first invented, it was technology. But now it's been around for so long that that technology has been perfected, so nobody really thinks of it as technology anymore, in the same way as you don't think
Yeah,
about a chair as being technological, but really a chair is a technology. I mean, even fire is technology. So it's funny
first,
that
I think the
like
first.
like 150 years from now, when people are looking back at a chorus pedal, it's suddenly going to have a whole new meaning and a whole new context, and people are going to be like, wow, like no, nobody would think of that as technology anymore, because now it works, it's been figured out, it's been done, it's almost like passe. But then
Right.
when you revisit it, suddenly there's a whole new depth, because like
Oh,
it's.
you're freezing. You're freezing up. Oh, oh.
Oh, sorry. um did you catch what I said, or do I need to repeat?
I did. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it was a great point. Yeah, it was really, really good.
So
So you're recording this for your own edification. What are you going to do with it?
the podcast.
This meeting that we're having. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's gonna be
Oh, it's a
released.
podcast.
Yes, it's a podcast. Yeah. Oh, it's
Oh,
gonna. It's being recorded, and I'm going to release it on YouTube, and I'm gonna put it up on social media and stuff, and of course I'll tag you in it,
yeah.
and
Well,
I mean, yeah, no, that's the point of the
let me know.
podcast, is
Yeah.
to have these discussions, which then become a kind of public resource, or a kind of testament or document, bearing witness to our artistic practices.
Very good. Well, man, you have made me think of something I haven't thought of in a long time, and that's digging out my sample tray, and that's good. You've inspired me, my man. That's awesome. I
Well,
love it.
I'm
Yeah.
also feeling inspired. I'm gonna check out all these players that you mentioned. And speaking of experimental musicians, we'd have to acknowledge John Zorn and the work that he's done. With his
Oh,
label Tzazik.
oh, oh, yeah, yeah. No, he's that's a whole other kind of a whole other universe, right? Because he's because he comes from such a weird solo little place. Like he really was a disassociated sort of angry young suburban dude, right? And it's like so. If you read like, there's a little bit of history written about him. You can read about it.
Yeah,
And he was kicked out of music schools and all that. No one took him seriously. But he did like when he got his start. It didn't take long before because he's a great hustler. Not to take away one little bit from his incredible musicality, but he's a hustler. He just wouldn't take no for an answer, and he went around and he
you
got
know,
stuff happen.
I kind of relate to that. Although my experience wasn't as well, I mean, see, I've had people tell me that I would never amount to anything. I've had people say, what you're doing is never going to be successful. You might as well quit now. And and
Sure.
you know and I think dealing with that antagonism, and dealing with that kind of that naysaying, it
Mhm.
actually forces you to really say, you know what, this is great, this is the friction that lights the fire. And
Right.
actually it's
Yeah.
the things that we have to push up against that sort of allow us to sharpen that knife, to sharpen that
Right.
edge, to Basically, that's the process of cutting your teeth. And actually, I would say that because of that, and because of all the challenges, and because of all that, getting kicked out of music school, and having people not take you seriously, I think that's part of why John Zorn is such a great hustler and such a great musician. Because
Oh, sure, no,
he had that
wouldn't
he had that fire which was lit, which was like, I've got to prove it, I've got to prove myself. And
yeah, yeah,
whereas if it's just handed to you on a silver platter, then it's suddenly it's not it's there's no it doesn't have the same character. It doesn't have the
yeah.
story. It doesn't have that narrative attached to it, which suddenly makes it more profound and connects it to something.
Mm. I mean, John Zorn is deeply prolific,
Yes.
right? So that is which is a sure sign of genius when you're just producing stuff just because you are compelled to produce it. That's true genius. And um, living in New York the way he did, he was able to hook up with a bunch of different scenes, right? And he was able to get a lot of different things going on that were really different. And he was able to record his music and get it distributed, which is very difficult. Had his own label, and he made money doing it. Do you know? Have you heard of John Oswald? You ever run across John Oswald yet? No. There's a group of sort of older uh, improvising guys. Um, if I'll try to get it together and send it to you. Oswald is like he's kind of like the non-musician musician. He's really an artist, a visual artist first, and
Ah,
really
so
really
kind
great.
of so kind of like Brian Eno, because Brian Eno's tape first instrument was a tape recorder, and the first composition he ever did
Yeah,
was the sound of a pen striking a metal lampshade slowed down on a tape recorder.
right. And this is exactly what Oswald was up to. Oswald had a thing called plunder phonics, where he was
Oh,
basically sued by just about everybody. You might have heard of that. Plunder phonics, right?
that
So
name,
he was
that's I don't know where I've read that name, but I've read it somewhere, and it's
right. So
striking
yeah,
it's striking a chord.
he's a Toronto artist. I've played with him. He's great. He's a funny cat, of course, like as we all are. But really interesting, really innovator. Like he plays the saxophone, but he's kind of jigged around with it and put stuff in different places and makes different sounds with his saxophone. And because of that, Zorn invited him to New York. And one of Oswald's stories was he was playing, I think, the Kitchen or maybe the Knitting Factory, one of those two places, which is kind of, sort of outside weird New York zone, right, where new music was being presented.
Yes.
And Zorn was down there improvising, doing I don't know doing what. Um, and at the end of the night, Zorn was kind of like you always kind of wonder, am I going to get paid? Like what's going to happen here? And Zorn walks up with just a wad of bills and just peels off a bunch of hundreds and says, "Here you go. We did really well tonight, right?" So, and John said, "Yeah, it was a really packed house." But Zorn also knew what he had, and he charged appropriately. Sometimes in those situations we undersell ourselves.
That's right.
We think
Like,
if
for
we
example,
if
for
we make a
example, at
ticket
that
to
1313 Hollis show, I mean, I think that's the only show where I've only played, like, we had one person who showed up. You know,
right an
that was
audience.
that was the first time I've ever played to just one person. And
Yeah.
it was on some level it was a very humbling and very intimate experience. Like, and
Yeah.
and of course the one person that did show up was like totally stoked and so happy, and like it's like his enthusiasm basically filled the whole room. And that showed me that,
Yeah, I
what,
remember that cat.
you
Yep.
know
Yeah.
and it was just, to me, that was hilarious. That was like that because
Yeah.
they say, you should play the same way for one person as you would 10,000 people. The same level of
Mhm.
authenticity, the same dedication, the same spice, the same, you've got to play the same way. But I mean, of course, when you're playing to 10,000 people, it's not as intimate, and you also have to project more, in a way. Like, you have to be larger than life. Whereas if you're playing in a room for one person, it almost feels like you're playing in your living room, which is or like for example in the court of the king, if you were a tabla player and you were playing for the king, it might just be the king sitting in the room listening to you, or just one of the courtiers. So there was that level of intimacy which we sometimes don't get at, for example, a big jazz festival where you've got thousands of people lining up, on the ground to listen to you. So it's a different aesthetic, a different experience, I would say.
True. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess I'm trying to think of the largest audience I've ever played for. Would have been about 6,000, and it is it's and it wasn't my gig. I was a side person, so it's a whole different bag of worms. But watching the leader of the event do their thing, and they were working just as hard for that crowd as they were for smaller crowds that I played with. So you're right. It's the energy of hitting the stage, the authenticity, the honesty, um, and that can bring out a trust. Like people go to your show and they trust that something cool is going to happen, and it always does.
Yes.
So that's a great way to ensure that people show up. But yeah, but Zorn's bag is, I guess he's definitely been an influence on me. I guess as time has gone on, I've been a little bit more interested in what Threadgill and Braxton have done, just because their systems are so amazing. But Zorn's thing is a total bootstrap. Like he totally invented that his own way. He conceived of it, as we've been talking about, and Zorn did.
And then he manifested it, he actualized it, which is
Yeah, and he employed a lot of people. He put money in a lot of people's pockets,
yeah.
which is important as a leader.
It
That.
is. And that's part of being an impresario, and that's
Yeah,
part of
yeah,
that's
that's right.
part of the role of being, a promoter of the arts, a patron of the arts. I
Hmm.
think is putting money into the people's pockets that really need it, the artists that need it most.
Right, the players, right?
Players,
In
yeah.
order to make that music continue, you need to be able to pay people to do it. So, and I guess that's the big concept we need right now. We need someone or we all have to work in our own quiet little corners about how to make sure that music making survives.
Yes.
So I mean, it always will with us, but like, um, it almost feels like, even though it's only been like it's March, April, May, June, July, August, September. So it's only been 9 months, like a gestation period, basically, for a human, that we haven't really been able to play or rehearse to the level we were even in January of this year,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, um, it, but it really feels like we've skipped a whole generation. Like there's a whole bunch of people that just don't even know what live performance is anymore. Of
Yeah.
course, isn't that's not true, but it feels like if it goes on for another 5 years, it might be like that.
Yeah.
So we do need to find a way of keeping the music because
The
for me the
tradition
thing
alive.
about,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's great to have your own solo concerts and that kind of stuff. I know you work like that quite a bit, but like you say, you have people come out and enjoy the concerts that you're putting on. Uh, for me, is and I like playing solo too, but I think we both would agree that there are times when having an ensemble and playing with other musicians can be so fulfilling.
It is.
As long as they're the right people and it's a safe space and all that kind of thing.
Well, and that's the thing too. Like, I mean, I think playing solo forces you to see, like, one of the reasons that I choose to play solo so much, is because it forces you to be so on point. There's like, you can't rely on anybody else to cover up for you if you fuck up.
That's right.
And so
Just,
it really
your
puts you on the
bullshit's right
spot.
there.
you know
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it puts you on that edge where it's live or die. Like you've
yeah.
gotta, like, if it's a solo concert, if you don't entertain the audience, if you don't make the audience happy, if you don't deliver what you said you were going to deliver, there's only you to blame. I mean, there's
That's right.
nobody. It doesn't fall on you. So it forces you to work that much harder and be that much more precise, and to have that, you know it just, yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I've chosen to play solo. And but like you said, like having a great ensemble is so fulfilling, and I love playing with people. And I mean, like when I did the creative music workshop with Jerry Granelli, that to me was an incredible experience, because I got to play with so many different people, and people that I might never have played with otherwise, because
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's an important thing. Have you ever met my man? I don't know, he's been in Berlin mostly, but a dear associate named John Farah. He's a great, great organ player and piano player. He's kind of, he's got about 20 years on you, but he's kind of a long doing a similar kind of thing. Anyway, I'll connect you guys on Facebook.
thank you.
Cause yeah, cause John would be somebody you would find quite fascinating. He's been a solo. Cause I think like again with keyboards and pianos and whatnot, I know like a lot of people who that is their career. Like you can play improvised solo music, original compositions, because you've got both hands and your feet or whatever. You're gonna make a lot of sound yourself, right?
Yes,
So
you can fill a
with
room basically.
yeah, right. So, and it's actually not that uncommon, but um, still in all, I think that I'm sure some of your ensemble experience spills over into what you're what you're doing when you're playing.
It does, it does, it does. And also, that edge that you get when you play solo, it also comes into your ensemble playing, because when you're with an ensemble,
Sure does.
you still feel that need to make sure that what you do is precise. Like when I take a solo, to other people, when they take a solo, it's like, oh, this is just my time to do me. But like, when I take a solo, I'm like, you know what? It is my time to do me, but then, like, I've got to listen to the room. I've got to listen to the people that I'm playing with. Like, I've got to be so aware. And part of that awareness for me comes from like reading the room and reading the audience, which is what I have to do when I'm playing solo. So I take that transferable skill into reading. Okay, what is the ensemble doing? Where's the ensemble going? And how can I play something that will that will, well, I mean, there is the idea of playing inside and outside, like doing something that maybe, um oh, I don't know if you know Jeff, by the way. This is leading me to a story. Jeff, I forget his last name. I think Goodspeed, or something like that. Who plays at Stainer's Wharf,
Well, he
that
did.
restaurant.
Standards is gone now, by the way.
Yeah, Stainer's is gone. Ah, oh
Yeah,
well, there you
yeah.
go.
No, I know Jeff. Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
And so I was playing with him and this girl called Allison, who's a violinist and a singer.
Enriquez.
Yes, Enriquez. Yes.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think we were playing Autumn Leaves, and I played some really weird chords. I think they were poly chords, and Allison was singing Autumn Leaves, and of course she handled it perfectly. But afterwards, Jeff came up to me and said, "You know what? I don't know if you're crazy or a genius, but either way, man, that stunt that you pulled, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have played all those chords. I mean, we're playing a standard." And and it was interesting to me because, like, in that case, I felt like, because I read the room, I read who I was playing with. I was like, you know what, I think she can keep up with it, and that's why I felt the freedom to actually go and do that stuff. Whereas if I'd been playing with a vocalist who I didn't think could handle it, then I would have just played the chords straight ahead as they were written. So in that sense, like, I think that context, that reading the room that comes from playing solo, that's the biggest transferable skill for me in playing with an ensemble. So you're right, they do inform each other, and there is that cycle, there's that feedback loop there, which is important.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really true. Listen, man, I gotta go. So we got a good talk in there.
We
We've been
did.
going at it for an hour and a half, and I feel like we could easily go for another hour and a half.
Well, the longest
I
the
gotta get
longest
moving.
conversation I've had on this show is like 3.5 hours. So we're right
Right.
in the middle. We're
The
we're
halfway
right,
point. But
and
what a pleasure to talk with you. It was great, and I'm so sorry to hold you up. It was not intentional in any way. Like I said, my head's in kind of in a bit of weird zone there. So,
no worries. And actually, you know what? I'm glad that you said that, because I've got another talk here at 4, and it's already 4:01.
okay, my man.
Well,
What a pleasure,
likewise,
and
likewise.
I'll
Oh,
look
and I
to hear
just
some more
before
from you.
before we end, I just want to get your thoughts on one thing, which is Sam Wilson. In fact, I'm going to be interviewing her later in next week. But I think
Oh,
she's a
great.
really
Yeah.
Really, really interesting player, and I love what she does on the guitar. It's so beautiful.
Oh yeah, she's beautiful. No, it's great, and she's just today released something that's going to be out that was released in Japan.
Yeah.
So she's got a label interest in Japan right now, which is really awesome. Or actual label that's backing her up. No, we went to her show at the Music Room,
Mm.
and it was really wonderful. Like she's doing some really interesting technical stuff, like some tapping and some really cool finger picking things, and writing. Again, very prolific. She's writing a lot of stuff. I think she's starting to write some lyric songs as well.
Uh-huh.
So that's going to be a great interview. I'll look forward to hearing it.
Well, hey, Jordy, thank you so much for this, and I really
My
appreciate it.
pleasure,
Like,
man.
so I'll
Too
let
much
you
fun.
know. I'll let you know once it's been uploaded.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Knock 'em out. What a
Bye.
pleasure. We'll see you soon, huh?
Okay, bye.
Bye.